In the following slideshow, I wish to introduce you to both the creative and commercial practice I've been involved in over the last few years. I hope it will give you an idea of the type of imagery I've been creating both as a working photographer and creative practitioner. Londonderry Historic City is one of the first shows that I've had. The idea of the work and the project was to explore Derry, as it's also known, as a historic city in the truest and most modernist sense. The images are produced somewhat vacantly, somewhat removed, to kind of give a sense of how events in the past 30, maybe 40 years have left a trace on the place, how it still has a connection with history and also contemporary Northern Ireland. Most of the images from the north we're used to are of kind of violence, troubles and the rest, and was more interested in seeing the aftermath of these type of things. It was a small project and it was my first show as a solo creative photographer. Um, this work is something that I want to explore a little bit further when it comes to doing my major project. I believe it still has legs in a certain point. This was the beginning of where my MA project will lead on to. From that project, I decided to look into ideas of nationality. What I mean by this is in Northern Ireland, the North, whatever you choose to call it, Derry, Londonderry, there's an idea that Protestant, nationalist, unionists areas are red, white and blue, nationalist, Catholic, Republican areas are green, white and orange. So what I wanted to do is get people to say what they really thought that were from these areas, and what I found was that although there's a general perception that if you belong to one side or the other, you are automatically assumed to be one or the other, and a lot of people didn't necessarily feel that. And I got them to actually write on the pictures so that they made a connection with each image. So although they're perceived to be from one part of the community, their handwriting was a strong juxtaposition on the actual image from a generalized view of how they should be taken or how they should be seen or what side of the community they belong to. I moved this forward a little in the next piece. This work was one of the Irish representatives of up-and-coming new photographers at the Arles Photographic Exhibition earlier this year in France. Here I took members of the nationalist community, again roughly the same age as myself, who had lived half their life in the Troubles, half outside of the Troubles, and while they all consider themselves Irish, they decided to move to Britain. So if they're from Northern Ireland, the question is kind of raised, where do they feel most at home? I decided to give them a tape recorder and let them go off and tell me anything they thought about any idea of nationality. I then selected sections from this and put it on the side of the images. Again, all these photographs are made in London, but these are guys who considered themselves Irish. The next piece, the family album, was shown in Temple Bar in Dublin. I was interested in the idea of the public and the private coming together. Everyone has family albums and we're all quite used to looking through them, and they all have a general aesthetic, kind of blurry 70s, 80s pictures, and it's an aesthetic we're all familiar with. But I was interested to see what happens once we change the context. John Tagg talks about taking something out of context and it becomes something else. So this is what I wanted to do. Each of these pictures, I know basically everything about the person in them. This is my family, this is my family album. But once you put them on a wall, they become something else. The viewer has a completely different reaction with them. They see them as something both familiar, because they recognize the aesthetic from their own family album, but also something very removed, something very strange. They don't know what's going on in any of these pictures, they don't know who the people are, they don't know what the stories are, but somehow they seem domesticated, familiar. There's also a twist. Each of these pictures have strange little things in them and are quite particular to my family. You may look at them and see a familiarity, but there's also that sense of removal. So you kind of play upon the idea of the public and the private. Lastly, outside of my creative practice, obviously as a photographer, I do commercial work, so this is just a flavour of some of that. The first thing is an article I wrote actually for an Irish travel magazine and got to take a few pictures while I was travelling around Cuba. It was a nice little piece and an excuse to kind of roam around Cuba for a bit and get some nice shots. The next bit of work coming up is commission work and retouching. Obviously as a photographer you have to be pretty well versed at this stage in Photoshop. So Gonzo Records is a Dublin based record label who I do some work for. The band is called Darkroom Notes, and rather than your average band picture, I always want to do something a bit more slick like this, and try and get it away from that classic, oh yeah, band against the wall type of thing. So I like to play around with it. I worked for an advertising agency. We basically done a bit of retouching and rebranding for Tiski. I also won Best Newcomer photographically in the Tony and Guy International Awards, and I shoot some stills for movies, which pays the bills, get to meet some interesting characters, hang around TV sets and stuff for days. It's interesting work if you can get it sometimes. So the commercial side is always kind of playing off against the creative side. For the Burn Thing example, Shot the Flames, help stick it together. These things are all dreamed up by agencies and I worked on them. Luckily, this is something I've moved away from. Again, the Apple thing, lots of retouching, shooting in layers, building images to make everything super sleek, super nice. Audi, again, the same type of thing as the Apple. So that's a little flavour of what I'm about, and I hope you enjoyed it.